Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sales Power in Less Than an Hour. You should continue watching this only if you want to learn from someone who's risen in the ranks from day one by just getting shit done.
All right, so today we have Olivia Van Wormer, who is currently the account manager team lead at PandaDoc, formerly an SDR and an account executive as well. Olivia has been a great go-to for colleagues looking for help, and she's also a fantastic sushi chef as well. A lot of you may not have known that. So, Olivia, if you can give us a quick story of where you came from and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think either of you guys have actually tried my sushi too. So I would say, you're saying I'm a good sushi chef based on my own recommendation of myself. So anyway, at some point,
it looks good. It looks good, but
your LinkedIn description of sushi, on point.
on point. I love it. Yeah, who thought they were going to watch a sales podcast, and it turns out we actually talk about sushi the entire time.
Worth it.
Exactly. So a little bit of background on myself. I was born and raised in Boulder, Colorado. I have kind of had, in a lot of ways, a somewhat untraditional kind of path in life. I was homeschooled up until high school. I decided not to go to college and travel instead. I worked in the restaurant industry for about 5 years. Tail end of that was as a sushi chef, hence the ability to make sushi. And then I was ready for something else, and I ended up getting connected with a company called Praxis, which basically just gave me the foundation and kind of the groundwork I needed to get a job at PandaDoc. And so I did that about 4 years ago. I'm coming up on my 4-year anniversary at PandaDoc, which is wild. And started as actually on kind of live chat / a lightweight SDR. It was pretty early stages at PandaDoc, and pretty quickly transitioned to becoming account executive. And then from there, was looking for something else in addition to that. And we decided, hey, we really don't have anyone who's solely focused on account management. Let's see if it makes sense to do this. So I spent about a year doing that as the only account manager. And then last December, we started building that team up and growing that team. And so now we have, almost 8 account managers, soon to be 8 account managers. Got to see a lot of change and work on different processes and things like that at PandaDoc. And just in general, I think learned a lot from the last 4 years at this company. And I'm really grateful for that. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think there's a lot of people out there who don't want to go that traditional route. And I think you being able to travel really puts life into perspective a little bit more. So what would your advice be to someone who, let's say they're about to finish high school and they're pressured into going the 4-year college route, but they want to start maybe in the sales world or tech world somewhere? What would you say to them?
I would say many things, but I think first of all, you have to have the inner strength to stand up if there are people who are pushing you to do something you really don't want to do. You're 17, 18 years old. It's time for you to take control of your life to a certain extent. And if someone's pushing you in a direction or society's pushing you in a direction, you need to create the backbone to stand up and say, hey, this is really not the path for me. And I think that translates really well too into sales, and basically any role at a job is being able to stand firm in your integrity and know when something does feel right or doesn't feel right. And so I think that's just a great skill to have in general. People who are looking though into sales roles or want to do something along those lines, I think there's so many different things that you can do to get yourself set up for success. And I think, first of all, LinkedIn, I don't use LinkedIn very well, to be honest, but LinkedIn is a huge resource of a ton of knowledge and people sharing information. So just start to look at your LinkedIn, connect with people who you feel like are inspiring to you and you could learn from, and just start to teach yourself, some things that you're not going to get from a college degree, because you're just going to be poised so much better if you do go to college or if you don't go to college to take that next step, because you'll have a really solid foundation before you actually, launch into your career, if you will. So Yeah, I think that would be my short advice for people, my non-long-winded advice.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I wish someone had told that to me at an earlier stage of school. And I think a lot of people in hindsight might say the same thing. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Liv, so diving deeper into how that mindset applies to sales, like, has there been a time where you have consciously had to have the courage to take charge in a call or in a meeting with a prospect, and what did that look like for you, and why did it have to happen?
Yeah, I think there are many times. I mean, you face that crossroad. I feel like almost on every call you take, that if it's sales related, there are a lot of times where you really have to maybe ask an uncomfortable question, or that's uncomfortable to you at least, or it's easy for somebody to kind of take control of the call. So trying to bring it back into your lane and be kind of driving forward in the direction you want to. So I think it happens all the time. And I also think there are situations where you'll be on a call and you'll realize, hey, this is actually really not a good fit for this specific client. So you also, I think, have to have the integrity to really just let the client or the prospect know immediately, hey, this is actually really not going to work for you, or at least that's what I'm seeing on my side, and be willing to have that type of conversation as well. So I think it shows up in so many different types of calls, and pretty much all the time.
Yeah, and um, so you mentioned like a question might be uncomfortable for you. Um, I don't know if an example specifically comes to mind, but I'm curious to know what one of those questions would be just for you. Like, what is something that you struggle with in a call that you have to force yourself to be like, okay, but I'm still going to do this because it's important?
Yeah, I think it's funny because I've been doing this for 4 years. And although I feel much more comfortable asking uncomfortable questions in a lot of ways, there's still like a little bit of discomfort in me with a lot of different questions throughout the sales process. I think, some of the hardest things for me are when I feel like I might be undermining somebody who's on the call. So if I have a champion, understanding, okay, who's the decision maker, and I have, I kind of battle with myself a little bit where I don't want to make the champion feel like they're less than, or that like, oh, well, I won't talk to you anymore. I'm only going to talk to the decision maker. But there are situations where that really needs to happen and you have to hold a firm line there. But I guess I have this weird sense of like compassion for my champion, and I don't want them to feel like I'm talking down to them or that they're less than. So that's one that I come across, pretty often. And then even just asking bold questions like, okay, what would prevent you from signing today? That one's a little bit less difficult to ask, but it's still, you have a moment of being like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to ask this question. So questions like that too.
And are there ways that someone who is in similar shoes can practice being bolder or asking those bold questions and having a good outcome as opposed to a weird, awkward one?
I think you have to embrace the discomfort. That was like my mantra at the beginning of my time at PandaDoc, and I've kind of carried it through because I was so green and had no experience in the SaaS world. So I was just like, you got to embrace the discomfort. Like anytime it feels uncomfortable, lean into that. With that said, though, especially if you haven't done sales before, you're new to sales, I think you can apply that to life outside of sales too. So if you're having a conversation with somebody and you want to ask a question that's a little bit more uncomfortable or maybe a little bit out of left field, like try practicing that a little bit in social situations. Or, I think you can ask questions to a barista even. Like if you want to get a discount at your coffee shop, and you feel uncomfortable asking for that or something along those lines, just see where you can apply that outside of sales. And I think that'll help you get more comfortable with asking those type of questions. And I bet that you'll end up actually having far more interesting conversations in your life if you are digging deeper and not just staying surface level in your conversations in general.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely good advice. I mean, obviously easier said than done, but
Yeah.
I think that what you're describing has a lot of value in sales and, like you said, in life in general. Switching gears just a little bit, I'm curious to know, so because you've been SDR, AE, and now AM, and you kind of like trailblaze the AM position at PandaDoc. How do you go about spotting new opportunity from where you are to sort of like expand your horizons based on what you're interested in? This is for maybe the person who is, you know, at work, they feel a little stuck and they want to try to create new value for the company in a different way.
Yeah, and I think that place is a really wonderful place to be in, actually, is in that I think a lot of times people get frustrated when they feel like they're not growing or learning. And I think that's a good thing to recognize and be like, okay, I'm feeling a little bit frustrated about being at my company or working where I work. Is it really that I'm frustrated about my specific position? Is it that I need a change? Is it that I need a change of company? Or is it that I really just need to take on some new projects and I need to continue to grow? Because I think that we feel uncomfortable as humans with becoming stagnant and feeling like we're doing things that just very repetitive. So I think first of all, it's a very good place to be in. How you get out of that, I think, is first of all, understanding what interests you at the company. Like, are there other teams that you work with on a regular basis that you feel like you could work closer with? Are there projects that you could take on that would be, you know, maybe not part of your normal scope of work, but would push you in a different way? I think also sometimes we wait for projects to be presented to us or a need to open. And really what you need to do on the opposite side of that is actually just see an issue or an area where you think there could be improvement, and then just dive into that. You know, you can't wait for people to tell you to do a project or to explore something. It's really going to have to be self-driven. So I think just trying to find if there are any areas within your day-to-day that don't feel quite right or that you feel like could be improved, go ahead and do that. And I can tell you that other people at the company will notice if you start really being willing to work with other teams and things like that, and doing additional things to create value that aren't part of your normal, you know, job description rules. So I think that's the best way to kind of get started with that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And just touching on what you said about figuring out what it is, what's bothering you, because a lot of people might have conflict in their outside life that maybe they feel like it's work that's causing it. And sometimes it might just be something at work they're not fulfilled with. So it's good to take a step back and think, okay, why do I feel dissatisfied with this job right now? And touching on what you said about, you know, finding problems and just finding new things that pop up to show that you're being proactive. Obviously, you guys both know Micah Brunzo. He was a former SDR manager at PandaDoc. When I first started, I asked him for career advice. Like, what do I have to do? And he told me to be proactive. And that was probably potentially the best advice I've ever gotten in my career, yet something so simple. But looking back now, like seeing what it's done for me and what it's done for other people within the company, it's crazy because you can't manifest a new position by just wanting it in your head. So I think that's great. I think anyone, whether it's at PandaDoc or any other company, I would say just be as proactive as you can, and doors are going to open.
I love that advice. And it's super simple, as you said, but I think a lot of the best advice is that way, where it doesn't have to be super complicated or intricate. It can be something as simple as that. And that ended up being incredibly powerful for you, which I love.
Liv, I had another question. I was just curious about, how does your sales process shift from, because when you're an AE, you're working with potential clients. When you're an AM, you're working with people who are already clients. Is that right? So
Yes.
how do you change that approach, just as a salesperson? What things do you need to do differently to make that feel seamless or natural?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the biggest shift for me was both the thing that I really love about it and the thing that's challenging about it, but is that you get to know your clients better. So the first thing that's great is you have a better relationship. And so it's a little bit more of a mutual understanding, and it seems a little bit less like a sales rep to a prospect. It's a little bit more like, you know, a trusted advisor, if you will, to a client. You I think have to be more strategic or delicate about the way that you push existing clients, because although we need to be, firm, you also don't want to push a client so far that they really feel like, hey, we've had a really bad customer experience here. This is not something we want, and get frustrated and potentially cancel. Like that's the most extreme version of that. But I think you have to be a little bit more delicate on that side of things. And I think really when you're providing something for your client, you're giving whatever it is, it might be additional support, you might do, I don't know, something outside of that, you can always ask for something in return. So asking for referrals, things like that. So I think it's just making sure that the relationship feels like a give and take, and that you're focusing on that relationship as well. So yeah, I think that's just the biggest shift. And you're not just, as an inbound or outbound rep, you're working with the client for a somewhat limited portion of time, a few months, whatever it is, and then you kind of pass them on and, you're done from there. That's not the situation here. So you have these long-term relationships with these clients. You have to understand that when you start the relationship. And then you also, there's nothing to hide behind when it comes to the product. They know exactly how the product works. They use it internally. They understand all of the different pieces. So you can't really, try to convince them that, hey, this piece works a certain way when it doesn't. Not that we do that as AEs, but I just think you have to have a better understanding of the product, because your clients also have a better understanding. So that's another piece of it that's definitely been important for me.
So I have a question for you. So you did time as an account executive and being the company's only account manager for a while. You obviously have a ton of experience with that as well. Which do you prefer and why? I'm assuming you're going to say the account manager side, but why is that?
Yeah, I mean, I prefer the account manager side. I really enjoyed being an account executive as well, because you are getting to uncover pain with clients, and you're kind of part of that fun process at the beginning. It's like the beginning part of a relationship where you're just like super excited about each other and like very hyped on spending time with each other. And then afterwards, it's a little bit more like a marriage. You're like, yeah, I know. Okay. Yeah. You've been around for a while. So I did really like that part about being an account executive. I like the ability to build the longer term relationships with clients and know who I'm talking to. And especially with everything that's happened with COVID and people working from home more, I've actually really enjoyed too, being able to get like a little glimpse into people's home lives. Like you get to see potentially their kids or their dog or whatever it is, there's a little bit more of that human aspect to it. So I really enjoy that piece of it. And that's something I think that you end up missing a little bit on the account executive side.
Yeah, definitely. I think the infatuation stage when you help someone solve a problem, something new, it is exciting. Like even back when I was in car sales, like selling someone a new car, I was like, damn, now I want a new car. Like this is fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the Zoom calls with people definitely makes this pandemic feel more real. And it's crazy how much just seeing someone's cat or dog in the background can really just make your day. It's like, oh, the dog, it's so distracting. But yeah, I think that's awesome. I think the account management side's really good, at least from a personal level, just from like managing a book of business. I think that's fun to continue helping that person every step of the way.
Yeah. And I think you're more involved too, or you're more, what's the word I'm looking for, but like tied to that client's success. Like you really want them to be successful because that's what's going to make you successful. So you have like a little bit more on the line too. And so it makes you, I think, even try to work harder for those clients because of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Olivia, tell us about a failure in your career and how you overcame that.
It's a very good question. And I'm having a hard time pinpointing one example. Not to say that I've never failed before by any means. I think that a lot of my failures have been on, thankfully, a smaller scale. And so they don't stand out as much because there isn't like a big kind of moment where I've been like, oh my gosh, that could have potentially ruined my career or my job or whatever it is. I also think the other challenging thing, and this is going to sound incredibly cliche, I apologize, but I feel like I've learned from my mistakes in a way that make me kind of forget them almost, of being like, oh yeah, I had that mistake, and then I kind of course corrected, and then I learned from that, and I kind of have integrated that stuff. I do think actually the one thing that comes to mind, and it's not related to my current job or position, but previously when I was working in restaurants, I worked at the same restaurant for a long period of time, and just the way that I left that restaurant and that job, I have I felt like I failed to do it in a very adult way and like very respectively. I would love to leave every job that I've ever been at and on a very positive note, and I didn't. And I think that is something that I regret, just because it feels like I closed the end of a chapter and I didn't do it in a way that really felt like solidified. So I think, if anything, that made me realize that there is going to be a time that you should leave every job. My dad has a saying, or kind of like a concept, that anytime that you go to visit somebody or spend time with people, you should always leave when it's still good. So you want to leave when you're feeling super jazzed about the fact that you just spent a few days with somebody or whatever it is, because there is a point where it goes too much and it's too long and you're like, oh, okay, now I just feel a little bit sour about it. So I think I've learned from this previous experience that there is going to be a time when it makes sense to leave, and it really does. And I have to trust my gut on that and know that that is the right time, because I don't want to push it past that point and then feel like, oh, I left on a sour note. So sorry that was so long-winded, but there you go.
No, don't. I think that's great advice. Like, I never thought of that perspective of when you're spending a long period of time with someone, to leave when things are good. That's interesting. I'm probably going to think about that like the rest of the day now, but yeah, definitely.
Really
I
struck a
think,
chord with Andrew there.
yeah, you did. I'm like thinking about it as I'm trying to like conversate with you guys, but I think that's good. I think every loss that you take should be a lesson, whether it's like a mistake in your career, because I'll admit myself, I learn most things by messing up. People can tell you the right thing to do all the time, but I don't think until you actually do it and feel whatever it is, the guilt from it, or being ashamed, or just feeling bad, whatever, that's when you really learn like what was wrong about it and where you cannot make that mistake again. So I think that's great advice. And sometimes cliche advice is good, because the more people hear it, the more they might understand it or accept that it's okay. So
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, sales is about building relationships, but so is everything else, honestly, like every career and just life in general. So working is one of those main kinds of relationships you're going to have to build at some point in life, and probably multiple times if you're lucky, and so learning how to maneuver your way through that with grace is really difficult, especially for young people. And I mean, maybe even for older people too, like if you've worked the same job for a lot of years and you're like, I want to take a risk and change it up. It's constantly something we're all negotiating. And I think that that's great advice, is to trust your gut, because if you feel yourself telling yourself like, this isn't for me anymore, but you're not listening to that, you're just going to resent everyone and everything you're doing. And that's not helpful. It's not bringing value to the company. It's not bringing value to your team. And then it makes you look bad. And then it might cut down on your chances in the future. You never know. So I think that's great advice.
Yeah, I think that too can be related to life in a lot of ways, as you said, even just with relationships. We don't need to get too philosophical here, but I feel like there are endings and beginnings constantly happening in your life. And so the same thing with relationships, friendships, whatever it is, there's a time and a place sometimes that it makes sense to end things. And I think as a society, we're almost ending averse, I guess. Like we don't like to actually make that change or really trust that it's time to end something. And so similar to what we were talking about earlier with sales and doing things that are a little bit uncomfortable or might feel like, you're really putting yourself out there, I think it's important to practice those things too.
Yep. Okay, Liv, got one last question for you. What is one thing that someone who wants to get better at sales can do right now, today?
They can listen. They can actively listen. And it's funny because I've just spent this entire time talking quite a bit. So, but I think that it's very important to be an active listener and not just listen for the things that you want to hear, but listen for what someone's actually saying. And I think, yet again, this can be applied to anything in life. My little sister is, I think, incredibly good at sales. She doesn't do sales, but she owns a company, and so she does a certain amount of the sales for it. But she's always been wonderful at it because she just loves to ask people questions about themselves. Like, since she was super tiny, she just loves understanding people. She doesn't like to spend a bunch of time talking about herself. She's really likes to dig in. And I think people want to talk about themselves. You know, it's very flattering to talk about yourself for a long period of time. So ask people questions. The next time that you're meeting someone for the first time, try to spend the first 15 minutes not talking about yourself and continuing to dig in a little bit on them and engaging and listening to them. So.
Okay, so like you're on the phone with a prospect and you are listening for how many documents they send out, as an example. Okay, like they might be telling you everything you need to hear, but you're sitting there waiting to ask the question, but how many documents do you send out? Like, you're missing everything they're saying. It might not even matter that they send out 5 because maybe their deal size is like $100K a deal. That's still gonna it's still gonna provide value to them to have something that's gonna help them maybe close those deals in the case of PandaDoc. Like, that's just one example. But if you're sitting there just like waiting for your turn, even though you've asked them questions, there's like asking questions and actually listen to the answer. And then there's asking questions so that you can ask pointed questions or get pointed answers. Like, it's totally different. It's not a real conversation.
And I think you also can skip, or you kind of miss a little bit of the actual human interaction because of that, because you're just like, okay, what's my next line that I'm going to say to them, or what's the next question that I want to ask them? And so exactly that, you can kind of skip over it. And I feel like when you're really listening, you actually calm down a little bit. Like, if I'm ever nervous, it's because I'm just rushing to get to the next question versus slowing down, listening to what they're saying and really being curious, and then taking time and pausing. That's something I'm really bad at, is I don't pause very often. And I think that's like one of the biggest ways to make someone feel like you're listening to them, is that you give them a moment after they've talked to absorb it and then respond. And I think that's, it's so important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what you said was great too, is like actually listening to the call. Because like when you're just listening for confirmation bias, you're not paying attention to detail. So if that's what you're doing, you're going to miss like important things. And one of the ways I learned that too is, you know, when I first started in sales, I was always thinking of the next step, right? It's like, okay, I'm hearing them right now, but getting ready to kind of rebuttal. But you can't rebuttal if you don't listen to what they say and go off of that. So I think it's important to like really pay attention to detail so you can touch on what they were actually saying. Because if you're just going to the next step, they're going to pick up on that.
Yeah. And they're going to feel like it's not very genuine. You know, it's going to feel like another sales call because you're not hearing them, and they can feel that on their side too.
Yeah,
definitely.
Well, Liv, thanks so much for coming on the show today. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me, letting me chat at you for quite some time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.